That's the one I wanted. Good. Okay, so, and like I was saying about making the mind clear and stable when we're doing meditation, if you really think about a kind of attitude that's really dedicated to achieving some goal. Now, I know it's funny because it's kind of a bit of some paradox in there, right? Almost an oxymoron, like having this kind of dedication to the goal of awakening, where the goal is to sort of abandon a sense of your own sort of self, I mean, your own truly existent self. So then it almost seems like, well, then how could you have like ambition to have a goal when, you know, the whole focus of the ambition, the self, right, is what you're trying to abandon? But it's true, it's there. I mean, it's not really that perplexing of a paradox, you know. It's because we have to understand things on two levels. So this is going to come in this text that we're going through by Shantideva in chapter 9, that's the chapter on wisdom, where he really talks about the two truths. So we have to take this with an understanding of the two truths, which means that there is a conventional level of reality as well as an ultimate level of reality. Conventionally, we do have selves. We are people. We have a free will. Conventionally means sort of on the level of how things just appear with our ordinary senses, just within our ordinary thoughts, as we interact with other human beings, with other people, as we do actions in this planet and see the results, right, in this world, with our body, with our words, with our minds. Mentally, we do actions with these three avenues for activity: body, speech, and mind. And we see results of those, right? Of those actions. All this is happening. None of these things are non-existent. So then when we talk about how the self doesn't exist, that's meaning when we do an analysis that's really looking at the ultimate nature of things, how things really exist when you go beyond the level of appearances, right? And I think a good analogy or a good way of understanding this is to look at quantum mechanics. Well, if you already have some understanding of quantum mechanics, otherwise it could become more confusing. But basically, the understanding, for those of you who have heard it, that for instance, right, this is usually how quantum mechanics is introduced, is through the double slit experiment, right? So when you have a double slit experiment, right? Long story short, depending on how you set up the experiment, either the atom, I mean, it's not atoms, the photons or the electrons, right? The thing you're looking at, either it appears to be a particle, like a little ball of energy, or it appears to be a wave. It takes on both characteristics, sometimes as a particle, sometimes as a wave, depending on how you set up the experiment. In other words, the conclusion from the founders of quantum mechanics themselves, Werner Heisenberg, Niels Bohr, Erwin Schrödinger, etc., the conclusion being that the way things appear depends upon the observer, right? The one making the observation or the observer. Okay, that means what? That means that when you really analyze, you can't actually find an actual thing, which is the photon, like that little ball of energy that's really truly there, findable in an exact location with an exact momentum. No, it's just not existent. The photon, the electron, they just don't exist in the way they appear or the way that we intuitively, instinctively think they should be. Okay, that's the quantum mechanics version. Let's go back to the Buddhist original, explanation from 2,500 years ago, but very similar. It appears that there's a self here, right, who's really truly inside of my body and mind, who's different from you, other people, right, who has its own unique personality that's really, kind of the owner of my personality, the owner of my body and mind. But when you zoom in and you really look for it, can you find something that is truly identifiable? The real essence of the I. You look within your body and mind, what do you find? Well, you just find, when you look in the body, you find And, depending on, again, how much you zoom in, but you start finding just body parts, right? Skin, bones, joints, blood, organs, right? Tissues. Okay. You zoom in further, you find molecules, cells, right? Then molecules, then atoms, and then you just find particles, these subatomic particles, which again, we already saw you can't actually find anyway from the real physics perspective, right? So in other words, there is no self that you found within the body. And then when you look in the mind, again, you find, right, kind of the most surface level. Okay, you have pretty much, I mean, there's so many ways. That's what we talked about in the last class of the Psychology 101 was how many ways you can kind of divide up different kinds of consciousness or the mind. So, but either way, okay, you find some, right, some minds that are conceptual, some are non-conceptual, right? The minds associated with the visual consciousness, the auditory, right? Eye, ear, nose, tongue, body, the mental consciousness, right? You find some minds that are more precise individual cognitive functions, right? Working memory and mindfulness, attention, right? All these different cognitive functions. In other words, you find all these different parts of your mind, but there's nothing there that's really the essence of I, right? Okay, so that's when you zoom in, then you go on this ultimate level of analysis, and you can't find an I. So that means what? That we are selfless, that the true nature of the human being is selfless. That's the Buddhist, the deep, profound insight of the Buddha that differs from all other world philosophical traditions or religious traditions, right? That's what makes Buddhism unique, is the teaching on selflessness. And one of the main thing, the main thing that makes it unique. I should say all the other things that make Buddhism unique come from that insight. Okay. Okay, so what does it mean related to what I was saying about meditation? If you really want to achieve this state of enlightenment, right? Yes, on the conventional level of just how things appear ordinarily, there is a self who can have a goal, the goal to become a better human being, a kinder human being with a, who has freed themselves or overcome the possibility of ever suffering again, freed themselves from suffering, right? You can become that. That's a goal that you can set. Even while when you make an ultimate analysis, you actually can't find a true self in there anywhere within the person doing all this work to become enlightened, right? When you really look at them, you don't actually find any essential person in there, but there's still some, on the level of appearances, conventionally, someone doing work. So my point was just to say that when we meditate, we can really try and create a sense of real dedication. Like think about an Olympic athlete, right? Someone who's really trying to achieve the best in their field, to be number one, to win the gold, right? It's that kind of energy that if you take to your meditation practice, right, that's really going to make your mind bright and clear and focused, right? You're like, okay, I have to practice well. I have to train well, right? I only have 6 more months to achieve, right, to have the trial for the Olympics. Of course, we have more than 6 months, but we want to do it, right? You have to make that kind of, you have to create that mind state for the effort to come. Okay, so that was just a little bit of tangent into meditation. Okay, let's go back into the text. Okay, so Geshima, she was busy, so she couldn't make it today, but she'll be back with us very shortly. Where were we? Verse 18, I think. Let me go back to verse 14. Start there. So I'll do the screen share. Make it bigger. Okay. So I think we got up through verse 18, but I'll want to go back to this one, verse 14. As I said last week, this is really one of the most quoted verses from this text. And again, this is basically, if we could say, is there a Bible of Buddhism, or the main text of Buddhism? It would be this one, the Charyavatara. I mean, His Holiness the Dalai Lama says this is where he learned compassion from. If I, everything I know about compassion, I learned. Well, first he says his first teacher of compassion was his mother, right? Very profound statement. But when he talks about from learning from the text, from the tradition, that he learned about compassion from this text, Bodhicharyavatara, the guide to the Bodhisattva's way of life. Okay, there is nothing whatsoever that is not made easier through acquaintance. So, through becoming acquainted with small harms, I should learn to patiently accept greater harms. So this would be a good verse to memorize even. There is nothing whatsoever that is not made easier through acquaintance. Even just those two lines. There's nothing whatsoever that is not made easier through acquaintance. Just to remind yourself, right? So valuable to remind yourself anytime you're trying to achieve some goal, you're trying to do something new, right? Practice a new, train your mind in a new way, training your mind in patience, training your mind in meditation. First time you sit down, try to focus on your breath or visualize the Buddha or any object that you want to meditate on. And it's like, oh my gosh, my mind is so distracted. Literally, I can't sit for 5 seconds without some distraction coming up. Yeah, okay, every person has the same experience. Literally, every single one of us, okay? That's not an exaggeration. Okay, we all have the same experience. But then you have someone like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, right? Or these other great meditators and teachers, or the Buddha. Well, if they started off exactly like us, not being able to stay focused for more than 5 seconds, maybe even 2 seconds, well, how did they get to be like these amazing, powerful beings with a mind that can focus without break for hours on end in meditation? How? Because there is nothing whatsoever that is not made easier through acquaintance. They just trained, they just practiced over time, over time. And with a sense of urgency and effort. So there needs to be some effort, or else we just won't practice. That's the thing, right? If we don't have a sense of urgency, or that's the kind of Olympic dedication, we just won't practice at all. And then what's going to happen? Well, we won't make any progress. Then how could it get easier if we're not acquaintancing ourselves with it, right? We have to actually make it the habit by doing the practice. Okay. And again, when it comes to this practices of patience, of overcoming anger and irritation and hatred and intolerance and all those other things included under anger, well, we don't have to necessarily be sitting on a cushion in the morning or in the evening to practice it, right? We can practice it when we're getting angry, when we're getting irritated, when you're sitting in your car. Okay, so that was like the next verse, right? Who has not seen this to be so with trifling sufferings, such as the bites of snakes and insects, feelings of hunger and thirst, and with such minor things as rashes? Now, I was saying like last week how fun, I mean, I think most of you agreed with me, how funny it is that Shantideva is calling these trifling, these things that we might consider honestly quite traumatic, trifling sufferings. A snake bite? I mean, rashes, okay, like you could say it's minor, but it's definitely not something we just ignore, generally, right? Um, but I was thinking, I just came to Connecticut from India, and I was traveling quite a bit in the last couple of weeks. I went from my home in Bailakope, South India, and then I had a conference in Delhi. I went to Delhi just for a couple of days. Then I went to Goa to teach a class that I was invited to teach in Goa near the beach, and then came to Connecticut. And I realized, like, well, what's maybe the equivalent for us these days? We don't get many snake bites, maybe, but just, I mean, well, just what actually we typically call, when we use the word patience or impatience, what's it typically referring to? The fact of just having to wait somewhere, right? Waiting on the phone with customer service, right? Trying to pay a bill or get something done. You're on the phone, you're on the phone. Please hold. All of our associates are busy, right? I mean, waiting at the airport, your flight's delayed, or there's some problem and you have to go to here or there, or your luggage is, missing. All these things that come up, right? That's perfect opportunities for practicing. And those I think most of us would probably would acknowledge as trifling suffering. Some people maybe would consider them, serious problems, but I think most of us can recognize they're pretty trifling. But they're definitely things that we get irritated about, right? It's hard to stay calm. I mean, even literally just waiting. I noticed this just at the airport when you're waiting, literally just waiting in the line to go into the airplane. It's like, there's so many people and it's hot. I mean, actually, in the US, they tend to have quite good climate control. Okay. Other countries, not always so much. It's so hot, and the sun's beating down. We're sitting in this corridor and there's no air. There's just all these people standing here. Why aren't they moving? Why aren't they going? I think, again, this happens when you're in traffic, when you're at a red light, right? All these things. So those are the kinds of things that anyway, you find whatever it is that triggers you, right? Whatever it is, right? Probably some situation at work, if you're currently working, probably dozens of situations that you find yourself in that you could use to help recognize, okay, this is irritation arising, this is annoyance arising, this is anger, and remembering all those, right? Especially the verse, I'll just read it one more time from just a few verses earlier. Verse number 10, right? Why be unhappy about something if it can be remedied? And what is the use of being unhappy about something if it cannot be remedied? So again, good one to memorize because that sets the whole stage for your practice of patience and fortitude and resilience, right? Because when you really take on this attitude, what it does is it just shows you, right? It's the most logical attitude you could possibly have towards your life situations. What's the logic of it? Essentially, that anger never helps no matter what. Never helps us solve problems. If there's a problem with a solution, anger is not going to add anything. It's just going to make you, frankly, it's going to make it harder to find the solution or see it clearly or think of different possible solutions, right? It's going to make you think, in a rash way where you just, you maybe rush or you react, too quickly and you do the wrong thing and it makes things worse, right? And if there's no remedy at all, if there's no solution at all to your problem after you've thought about it and tried to look at different options, well, the anger isn't going to it's not going to make it any better at all, right? The situation just is what it is. Okay, we have to accept sometimes that's the case. Anger, annoyance, worry even, right? Worry, anxiety, those aren't going to help. So it's this right, basically just training your mind, right, making it easier through acquaintance, through habituation, in this way of approaching your life. Okay, I'm just not going to get angry. I'll make the decision right now. And whenever some situation arises that starts to trigger, I start to feel annoyed, irritated, just remember, wait, is this really helping? Is this going to help at all? And just reminding yourself and thinking about it naturally. That is emotional regulation. That is the process of emotion regulation, okay? Okay, and let's go because Shantideva has even more for us. Okay, so then we stop to think with 18, right? So these reactions come from the mind being either steady or timid. Therefore, I should disregard harms caused to me and not be affected by suffering. Okay, 19. Even when the wise are suffering, their minds remain very lucid and undefiled. For when war is being waged against the disturbing conceptions, much harm is caused at the times of battle. Okay, what's going on here? What is Shantideva referring to, right? This is now we're talking about having a battle with our own disturbing conceptions means, again, it's this kind of awkward, awkward meaning a difficult to translate term because it refers to a type of psychological element which we don't have an equivalent concept of within Western psychology. So we have to sort of find other ways to describe it, but it's all the types of thoughts and emotions, all the mental activity, every single piece of it that makes our minds unpeaceful and makes our minds have suffering, right? And they're always also somehow distorted. They're distortions of reality, these kinds of disturbing conceptions. So they're also called what? Afflictions. or afflictive emotions. We can call them maladaptive cognitions, or just misperceptions, right? I mean, negative misperceptions. Now, not all misperceptions are going to cause us suffering, but the afflicted ones. I mean, I think afflicted is a fine word. It's not talking about physical affliction. That's all we have to recognize. It's talking about something else. So what are these? Again, well, anger and all the different types of it, attachment and craving, right? Desirous attachment and craving, ignorance, jealousy, greed, pride or arrogance, right? Those are the main ones, really, right? Right? Distorted views or beliefs. So these kinds of things. When war is being waged against them, much harm is caused at the times of battle. What does it mean? Well, when you're really trying to overcome these, well, what happens is first they arise, okay, in your mind. Every single day they arise in your mind. So we have no, there's no break in our ability to do this practice, right? They're ready to battle all the time. Now we just have to, we just have to make ourselves ready to battle, okay? So one comes up, brandishing its sword. What's the first thing? Well, you just have to notice it, right? So a big part of this is learning to become more aware of what's happening in your mind. Part of the, the way we do that is by learning the definitions of these different afflictive emotions or disturbing conceptions, learning, what their functions are. And as we learn, we learn the words, we learn the descriptions, the explanations, and then we reflect on those. And then that's like I gave the analogy, I think during the last 8-week series, that it's sort of like how, a biologist, right? A cell biologist, cellular biologist, they have to learn what composes a cell, right? The nucleus, the mitochondria, the cell wall, all the different parts before they understand, like when they look at it under a microscope, if they take a slide and prepare their sample and put it under the microscope, if they you just like threw that in front of like, a 10-year-old kid without explaining anything to them, well, what are they going to actually see, right? I mean, certainly there's something visual, some visual content appearing. They have no clue what it is, what it means. Same with our minds, right? If you just literally just sat there and just said, okay, I'm looking at my mind now, okay, you'll see something, right? You'll have some experience of something. And frankly, it's better than not doing that at all. But I mean, just to turn inwards and just look at your mind, but without really hearing or learning the explanations of, okay, what is anger? What's its definition? What's its function? What different types of anger are there? When does it arise? What are its causes and conditions? Without learning that, it's not going to be easy to identify all the different types of anger. Maybe when you're like really like burning with rage, okay, you can identify that. But subtler types, maybe not so easy to identify, right? And the same thing with attachment. Attachment's very hard to identify because, well, it just feels like pleasure, frankly. I mean, subtler types of it, right? When it's like burning craving and we know we're being irrational and that, the thing we really want is, it's so overwhelming that we can see, okay, this is not a good state of mind. This is something wrong with my current state of mind. But when it's just like basic, like, I mean, literally just like holding the hand of your partner and feeling that, the pleasure, like that's attachment, actually. I mean, well, you have to make a distinction. Part of it's attachment, part of it's just pleasure, part of it's just the physical sensation. I mean, there's many things going on, but for sure, for the average person, there'll be attachment there. Okay. So it's hard to identify these things without learning about them. Okay. So anyway, that's the first step, to learn about them, to identify them, right? So you see, okay, that's the enemy. You see what's the uniform look like? What are they, what weapons are they using? Okay, you identify that's the enemy. Well, now you have to actually go to war, right? You have to actually battle the enemy. So how do you do that? Well, with all these different methods that are taught in these texts, these different contemplations. The methods, they're all mental. They're all part of, I mean, 90%. There are some that have to do with your, like, I mean, like the biggest way to deal with these negative emotions that isn't a reflection or contemplation, that's not just something you do with your mind, is simply avoiding the triggers for them, right? That's the whole thinking behind the whole monastic order, the whole monastic community. The point of it is so that people have some space from objects of attachment, right? If you're a man and you want to really focus on your meditation and developing the mind, well, you have to take a step away from objects of attachment. Women, if you're a woman, you have to take a step away from your object of attachment. Men, so you go into an enclosed community that just has other men or just has other women, right? Pretty common sense, honestly. Um, but either way, for people when you're not ordained, which of course most of you won't be, then it's the same thing though. You can still learn to take a step away from big triggers of your negative emotions. If every time you turn on the news or go on Twitter or go on Facebook and you see the situations happening politically and you go, I can't take it. Well, just don't take it. Like, you don't have to. It's like, why even go and put yourself through that suffering, right? Okay, there are maybe reasons that you feel like being a good, it's important to be an informed citizen. And okay, so you have to, think about what's really best for you at a certain point at the different points in your life and what's your priority. So it's gonna, you're gonna come to a different conclusion than the next person, right? Everyone has their own priorities. But just from the perspective, right, of practicing so that your mind can really generate a powerful, stable peace and happiness. With that, if that's your priority, then it makes sense to maybe just take a break, at least temporarily, from the news or from triggers, or at least not often, maybe like once a week, catch up on things instead of every day, right? Again, just trying to be practical. Okay. So anyway, that's one way, taking a step away, one possible solution. That's not going to be a permanent fix, right? You're not going to kill the enemy by just running away, right? That's retreating, right? Retreat, okay? Run away. The enemy is still there. So how do you actually battle them? Well, that's with these different contemplations, right? Different reflections, different ways of developing wisdom that undermines these these afflictions, because as I said, they're all distorted somehow. So if they're distorted, how is anger distorted? Well, when we defined it a few weeks ago, right? Anger is a mental state, right? A mental element that over exaggerates the negative quality of something, the negative aspect of something, a person, an object, even a feeling, over exaggerating the negative, only focusing on that and sort of coming to see the way it perceives is that that person or thing is defined completely by its negative quality. In other words, it's just projecting this something that has, yes, negative qualities exist. People do bad things. People have, make mistakes, do harmful actions. But when you then associate that person 100% with that one negative quality, that's a distortion of reality because the person is not 100% negative. No person is. That's a distortion of their reality. So through wisdom, through contemplation, through reflection, you can counteract these distortions and the emotions that then are fueled by the distortion, right? So when you're doing this, what is Shantideva actually saying in this verse? Even when the wise are suffering, their minds remain very lucid, undefiled. For when war is being waged against the disturbing conceptions, much harm is caused at the times of battle. So when the wise are suffering, so again, we're talking about enduring suffering through these last few verses, right? The mind trying to cultivate a state where your mind you can kind of handle these situations. Again, starting with smaller sufferings, increasing your capacity and your resilience to deal with greater sufferings. So when the wise are suffering, their minds remain lucid and defiled because they know the bigger picture. They know that they're trying to wage war against the disturbing conceptions. They know that that means that anger is going to arise and they have to work to keep it at bay and remove it and see it when it starts to arise and immediately come and use wisdom, use patience to overcome the anger, right? And they know that in the process of all this, suffering is going to come. Now, part of the suffering is just because of the afflictive emotions themselves. In other words, attachment, for instance, right? If you have attachment, I'm just using the example, let's be real, right? If you decide to become a nun or a monk and you're staying away from the object of your attachment, well, there's suffering there because you're not having your desire fulfilled, right? That's a kind of suffering. So having attachment without it being fulfilled is a kind of suffering itself, right? having anger. Anytime you have anger, it disturbs your peace of mind. Just the mere presence of it. That's a kind of suffering itself, right? So the afflictions, the afflictive emotions themselves create suffering. So this is part of the harm that's caused at the time of battle. Now, why is it happening? Well, because you're actually willing to pay attention. So in ordinary life, when you're not, trying to be a warrior fighting your disturbing conceptions and misperceptions, what do you do when you have some unfulfilled attachment or when you have some anger? You distract yourself. You just distract yourself, right? You go find something else to get a fix from, or to get a little bit of dopamine or something, right? You if you're angry, you just turn on something to distract your mind, right? Entertain yourself essentially, right? Okay, not that those are all terrible ideas, but you're not really like digging into what's happening in your mind, which allows you to just experience it more fully. And so there's some suffering. And there's you when you see what's happening in your mind more clearly, you see that there's a lot of suffering there. It's like the first truth, the first noble truth, right? Buddha said, Four Noble Truths, the first one, this is the truth of suffering, right? What did he say? Birth, aging, sickness, death, not getting what you desire, meeting with what you don't want, what you dislike, being separated from what you love, what you like. Those are all forms of suffering. So when you really are waging war against the disturbing conceptions, against the negative aspects of your mind, what are you doing? You're watching it all. You're actually willing to experience the fullness of your mental life, and you notice that there's suffering. So that's why the wise, so that's one way. There's suffering in the mind itself, and then of course the physical suffering that comes because when you really make the decision to attack your disturbing emotions, your afflictive emotions, well, your whole life is going to change. In other words, your actual, not like 100% necessarily every person has to, but in general, like the kind of career you decide to go into, the kind of job you decide to take, the kinds of relationships you get into, that's all going to be different when your main priority in life is now changing your own mind, right? So that means, you might find yourself with less wealth, with less, less ability to, have the kind of pleasures of the senses, right? So there will be some physical suffering as well. So all I'm saying is that there's mental suffering, there's physical suffering, but the wise, they recognize all of it is just part of the necessary process to really develop their minds to a point where they can overcome suffering. It's all with that goal in mind, right? We're enduring this temporary suffering. So this is a very important practice. Is it maybe not practice? What's the best word to call it? An important like a metric to use in Buddhist practice or in Buddhist thinking. What's the metric to use in terms of deciding a choice of a choice, right? Making a choice or deciding a certain path of action. Well, how do you choose? Well, you look at four things. Okay. Does it bring happiness? Does it bring suffering? And then you look at short term versus long term. So does it bring happiness in the short term? Does it bring happiness in the long term? Does it bring suffering in the short term? Does it bring suffering in the long term? Okay. So if you can do this kind of analysis, well, what's the best action, the course of action to take? Well, if it brings happiness in the short term and the long term, then of course, definitely go for that kind of action, right? Do that. Okay. If it brings suffering in the short term and suffering in the long term, don't do it. Avoid that action, right? Now, if it brings happiness in the short term, but suffering in the long term, I don't know what fingers are what anymore, but anyway, if it brings happiness in the short term, but suffering in the long term, then you shouldn't do it because ultimately it's leading you towards more suffering. And that's a lot of actions that we do. They bring us happiness in the short term, but more suffering in the long term. So it's very important to really think about that. Now, the last one is where it's most relevant to this verse, right? Even when the wise are suffering. So what is it? When it brings suffering in the short term, but happiness in the long term, then you should still do it. Okay, so that's what this verse is about. When the wise are suffering, their minds remain very lucid and undefiled, right? Because they're seeing, okay, even in the short term, there's some suffering here, but in the long term, it's going to lead me to happiness. So that gives them courage and strength to endure or be able to, keep their minds lucid and undefiled. Keep your mind calm, even enduring this short-term suffering. Does that make sense? Okay, very cool. Good. Okay, we're going to the next verse. Now, I love this verse. Actually, I need to check the time. Sorry. Oh, okay. We have 10 minutes. Good. Okay, I love this verse. Okay, number 20. The victorious warriors are those who, having disregarded all suffering, vanquish the foes of hatred, and so forth. Common warriors slay only corpses. Let's see. Does it make sense? Do people think this makes sense, or is it confusing? What is it? What do you think Shanti Dev is trying to say? Maybe someone, if you have an idea, you can share it. Anyone feel free to share if you have an idea. Do you have an idea?
Maybe anything that common warriors are slaying are basically already dead. They're not slaying, they're slaying insignificant things, kind of. They're slaying painful things or.
That's an interesting take. So in a sense that I think you're on the right track. So I don't know if you actually could hear Melinda, but she said that common warriors slay insignificant things. Sort of. Well, just think about it. What does a common warrior mean? A warrior, that's someone, a military member, right? Someone in an army or military. Okay. Well, when they slay something, what is it? They're slaying what? Other humans, right? They're slaying their enemies, the enemy team, the enemy army, other human beings. Well, why are they only corpses? Well, the point is, what Shanti Dev is saying here, if you kill another human being, they're only just going to die anyway. The nature of a human being is impermanence, right? We all are going to die anyway. So if you just go around killing humans, it's like you're slaying corpses because they're all just going to become corpses. There's no need to kill them. In other words, they'll just naturally die. But hatred and other afflictive emotions, they won't just die on their own. They don't just stop. They'll continue on and on and on and on in this limitless cycle called samsara until we actually slay them, until we vanquish them. Okay? So that's why we say that samsara, it has no beginning. You can't find a beginning moment to samsara. No, this is it's really a challenging philosophical concept. It's a challenging idea, especially coming from a Western background where the world very much has a beginning and our existence as an individual person very much has a beginning, right? God made the world in 6 days and rested on the seventh, but then every single person is created, with the soul by God in this life. It's not even coming from a previous life, right? Well, the Buddhist notion, again, is quite similar to the general Indian thought, the Hindu systems of philosophy as well, but no, it goes back, and it goes back to that first moment of conception and looks at the nature of consciousness and sees that it's something that doesn't just come out of nowhere, it can just pop into existence. Just like the body, just like material objects, they have to have a previous cause in the continuity of causes and effects, right? The body doesn't just pop into existence out of nowhere, neither does the mind. So it comes from a prior consciousness, a continuity that existed before. Well, where would that be? Well, it'd have to be the consciousness of another life, another person, a different being that existed before this lifetime. And then you just keep going back. Why would you be able, if you can't find a beginning to this lifetime, well, how would you find a beginning to the one before? Or the one before that, or the one before that? So this is the logic, right? And it just really, it forces us to the logical conclusion that there's no beginning to our cycle of birth and death, and birth and death. It's a profound concept, really. I mean, to really kind of sit with it is very powerful and challenging. But again, nothing the Buddha said is meant to be taken just at face value just because the Buddha said it. It's meant to be investigated. So the process of investigation, whatever conclusion you end up at, is still going to increase your wisdom. You're going to learn something if you really sit and do an analysis and reflect, contemplate. It changes your attitude, your perspective when you do that kind of contemplation. Okay, so anyway, that's our situation in this worldview, in this philosophy. So that means that these negative emotions, well, where did they come from? Just like our consciousness or mind in general came from a prior continuity, a prior mind, so did our hatred, so did our anger, so did our irritation, right? The potential or the habit of having these emotions came from a prior instance of that emotion, right? Stretching back without beginning, without a single point that we could say that's the beginning. So what does it mean? Samsara has no beginning, but it does have an end. Okay, now the end doesn't just come without doing anything, or else it would have ended by now. It only comes when you make that decision to end it. When you say, I'm going to be the warrior that's going to vanquish the foes of hatred and so forth, and vanquish especially ignorance. So again, that's that attitude of being the Olympic athlete, of being the champion, of being a warrior, just whatever analogy works for you, but to make you really feel like, yeah, you really have to throw some skin in the game. You have to really put yourself into this in order to make a radical transformation. And then you can. And the proof is the other people who have done it. Actually, the proof is really, again, there's a philosophical proof, like really looking at the nature of consciousness or the nature of mind and really understanding the selflessness that I talked about at the beginning of today. That's like the philosophical proof. But then there's just the proof of what we can observe is the other beings who have done it, right? I mean, when you really meet someone like His Holiness the Dalai Lama, there's no one, right? There's no one on this planet who has met His Holiness the Dalai Lama and does not acknowledge there's something unique about that man, right? And I do advise you, if you ever have an opportunity to actually meet him and go in his presence, take it. Take that opportunity. He's getting older. He's 90 years old this year, right? But even Mao Zedong, who completely tried to destroy the entire culture and have him killed, knew there was something special about the Dalai Lama, right? He didn't just think he was an ordinary person, right? Okay. Okay, and we at time. Okay, maybe I'll do one more and then, no, actually we should stop and meditate for a few minutes. Yeah. So what we'll do is do some meditation for just the next 2 or 3 minutes. And then if there's questions or some people want to stay after the hour and ask some questions, you're welcome to do that. Okay, so everybody, again, find a comfortable seated position with your spine. The main instruction is to keep your spine straight. And you can let your eyes close gently, or they can be slightly opened. And now just think about this verse here. The victorious warriors are those who, having disregarded all suffering, vanquish the foes of hatred, and so forth, all the negative emotions. Common warriors slay only corpses. So really just think about how you can apply this verse in your life or in your mind, in your thinking. In other words, think about the kind of courage it takes to really become aware and mindful of what's happening in your mind. And then think about how much benefit you would get if you became that kind of courageous warrior who could really observe clearly without any without shrinking away, without being afraid. Observe clearly what's happening in your mind, be honest about it, and then really take steps to make some change, to change how you react, to put a gap between an event that triggers an emotion and then the reaction. So become that warrior that's able to, again, there's the kind of sense when we talk about warriors slaying the enemy, it's like a sense of violence, but there's no violence here. It's just an analogy, right? But there's an energy, there's a determination. That's what's similar about the warrior, not the violence. So you want to have this kind of courage, but a joyous courage that's just really happy to be entering reality, seeing reality more clearly, and overcoming your negative emotions. So just kind of, contemplate for a minute or two what that could look like in your life and how you might start taking steps to become more aware of the different emotions and the different negative or afflictive emotions happening in your mind, and just becoming a little bit more day by day, a little bit more cautious or able to regulate and control these emotions so they're not controlling you. And even think that there could be some interesting benefit if you really practice like personifying your negative emotions and personifying yourself as the one who wants to overcome them. It just sort of creates this dynamic in your mind. So it gives you a little bit more sense of being able to, point out, see when there's an afflictive emotion, being able to kind of undermine it by really just making this almost, yeah, almost trying to get into something like a game or something like this, like a something like a game or a show. Okay, and finally, we'll dedicate the merit. So recite a few verses. Like if you don't know the verses, just think about sending any positive value that came from this hour. Send it, give it to other living beings for their ultimate welfare. Changchu Samcho Rinpoche Ma Ge Pa Nam Ge Gyo Chik Ge Pa Nyam Pa Me Pa Dong Kong Ne Kong Du Pel War Shou Kangri Rawe Korwe Shinkam Dir Pendant Dewa Malu Jungwe Ne Chenre Zingwang Tenzin Gyatso Yi Shabe Si Te Bardu Tengyor Chig. May the precious Bodhi mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May that born have no decline, but increase forevermore. In the snowy mountain pure land, you're the source of good and happiness. Powerful Tenzin Gyatso Chenrezig, may you stay until samsara's end. Okay, that's a long life prayer for His Holiness the Dalai Lama. Again, because it's so important that we have spiritual leaders and guides who can really show us the path. And the only way we can learn how to become enlightened is if we learn from others who are. And so we need them in this world. So that's why long life prayers are an important part of Buddhist practice. Okay, now if anyone wants to stay and ask questions, I'll stay as long as you have questions. Feel free to just raise your hand. Okay, we have a hand from Shmuel. Go ahead. Can you unmute?
Yes, can you hear me? Yes. Hello, Venerable Donyo.
Hello.
So, can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes. Okay. So sometimes, especially after being overcome by afflictive emotions, I feel that my starting point is insufficient for spiritual practice. That the best thing I can do in this life is just deal with some gross emotions and lay some very basic foundation for spiritual happiness that will hopefully happen in future life. Now, how do I know if this is a realistic thought?
Well, I'm not sure entirely what you mean that you want to deal with kind of a grosser level of emotions, but not spiritual practice. I don't see what you mean, because I think dealing with any negative emotions, that is spiritual practice, as far as I know. You mean like go to therapy or something like this, but not meditate, or is that kind of what you mean?
Yes, for example, yes.
Okay. Okay. Interesting thought. I definitely think that there's a place for therapy, for sure. I mean, I wouldn't say don't go to therapy if you feel like that would be valuable. So that there's a place for that, and that can help you understand, again, what's happening in your own mind, why, and they can give you other possible, techniques or strategies to work with things. I would say, though, that ultimately it comes down to that would be more of, a complementary practice or a complementary, act, because what do they do in therapy? I mean, certainly there's many different kinds, but at some point they're giving you techniques or strategies to work with your emotions. So it's still, in the end, you have to do something to work with your emotions. Now, okay, maybe sometimes just talking it over is a big help itself, right? That lets you, see things. It lets you kind of free up, your sense of, I don't know what exactly, but it's hard to describe, but it makes you feel, right, heard. There's a lot of value, positive value, to just being able to talk about things openly. I get that part of it. But at some point, if you really want to make kind of changes, then that's probably what's going to happen, is they'll suggest strategies or techniques. And that's then not really that different from what we're doing here. Does it mean you have to like make the goal to become enlightened? No, you can make the goal to be a better person, to be less stressed, have less suffering in this life. That's still fine. Why do we say, oh, we should generate the motivation to benefit others, to become fully enlightened? Well, because that's for the long term going to be of the greatest benefit for everyone. But it doesn't mean that you have to like make that your constant focus all the time. If it's too big of, if it's just, you really have to start focusing on what's most present, right? What's most present for you. But you could still use these techniques, I would think, and that they would just complement each other, complement therapy or other strategies you're using. Okay, I'm not sure if I'm right, but that's what I can think of right now. Any other question? You can go ahead and just unmute if you want. Hans? Yeah.
Actually, it's not really a question, But when Shmuel talked about what he was about his question, something came to my mind, and it was in the hotel business when I was working, and the waiters and the waitresses, and they would come to me and, how can I make more tips? How can I get more tips? I mean, I need to make money, and it was a real kind of like a very, how you call it? I mean, it was a day-to-day thing, a really kind of like worldly thing, how can I make more money? So it's very difficult, of course, but I taught with everybody at the front desk as well. I mean, it's in hotel business, it's all about this. So when you talk about people and say, look, just make sure you give the best service that you can give to a person. Don't worry about the tip. Don't even spend a moment thinking about the tips. Just be the person that gives the best service. You will be amazed at the end of the day when you look in your pocket. It will just, how you call it? It will just run after you. So that is one of the things that came up thinking about your question. So that's what I wanted to share. I hope not
Thank you.
babbling too much.
Oh, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. Thank you very much. Okay. Right. So that's right. So if you don't really think about kind of getting getting something in the end, but just think about doing your best, essentially, right? Being kind. I'm going to be kind today. Do my best at being kind today. That itself, that the rest of your spiritual practice will follow from it.
I had a comment.
Oh, go ahead, Susan.
I was, when we were talking about the slaying of corpses, the thing that crossed my mind was obsessions. Like you have a difficult conflict with someone and you continue to run through, you obsessively think about this interaction that's already dead. So, we're already past that point, but the conversation, it's a corpse, the issue, but it's alive and well in your head and you're continuing to attack it in some way. That was kind of what came to mind for me in that phrase.
Wonderful. Exactly right. Yeah. And that is, yeah. So these verses, like, you can interpret them and think of them in many different ways. That's the power of this text. So that makes perfect sense. And again, that's one of the biggest, ways that we create suffering for ourselves, right? Ruminating about something that's long dead, right? A corpse.
Right.
We just keep going back to it. It's like we pretend it's really still alive. Come on.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. How do I access recordings of these classes?
Oh yes, they're on the YouTube channel. So are you registered with the newsletter?
I am.
Okay, good. So make sure you do that, and then periodically updates are sent out and you'll get that. Yeah, I think I tried to send out an email, to alert people that the time has changed for India, but
Right.
I put the link and I didn't for some reason save, like I put the link in for
Yeah.
YouTube channel. I didn't save it properly. So I
Right.
can send it
So
guess,
if I just go to YouTube and Forest of Wisdom, I'll be able to access.
You will, or I'll just send it right now just to make it really just to make it really easy. I'll put it in this chat.
In the chat. Okay.
Yeah. And there also is a WhatsApp group that not that many people are in, but I'll put a link for that again just so everyone, meaning like a WhatsApp group that we made so that we don't have to send an email every time there's a little announcement.
Right. Okay.
But I'll send a link to that as well.
Okay.
Just in case.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, and sorry for those who do try to watch the recordings. They're not always put up right away, so sometimes it's kind of late. But we'll try to get a better system in place once Geshe-ma comes, which hopefully it's probably going to be quite soon, then you know, we'll be able to have a little bit more of a system in place.
Okay.
Yeah.
I liked all the classes, but this was a particularly good one for me. So thank you.
Good. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So everyone up to now is there online. Okay. Shmuel, go ahead.
So I have another question. So you mentioned that one has exceptionally strong anger or attachment. One short-term strategy is just to distract oneself. Now, what could be a skillful short-term strategy?
For very strong attachment or anger?
Yes.
Well, I would say that you would want to be aware of what's happening in your mind, but you can still distract yourself. In other words, just be conscious about the fact that you have this affliction. Don't just run away from it and distract yourself, but be conscious that this is arising and say, okay, well, this is so powerful, and I really see that it's harmful, and I really don't want to act based on, out of this. So I'm going to move myself. I'll remove myself from this. I just won't talk to this person anymore. Just walk away, right? Or, okay, I have to sit down and watch my breath. Watching your breath is an amazing tool. I have to sit down and take some deep breaths. I mean, it's a very common, you don't have to be a meditator or, Buddhist to take deep breaths as a way to calm down. Or for attachment, I mean, it's similar. You kind of want to move yourself away from the object. But yeah, it can be hard. I mean, I think you have to sort of find things that work for you. Like maybe if you have really strong attachment to one thing, you can do something else that has less harmful impact, but still kind of somehow satisfies your attachment. Like play a video game, I don't know, watch a movie, whatever, play play a sport, exercise, right? Things like this can help. But kind of it's hard to give those are suggestions. So you have to sort of find for yourself. But you do want to be aware, right? You don't want to just run away from what's happening in your mind.
So
And sometimes
what's the
that's a
difference?
solution. Yeah.
What's the difference between the two ways, like running, merely distracting oneself, and running away and not merely distracting oneself, and not running away?
Well, if you just run away, then, you're not really, I mean, it's just a different way your mind's processing things. You're not actually confronting what's going on. You're suppressing, right? You're suppressing. So, it just is it's a more delusion, I guess you could say. It's like you're adding delusion. So overall, again, in the long term, thinking always about how this is what the results long term will be. It's not going to help you overcome it, right? You're just going to have a little bit of temporary relief. If you are consciously aware that you're doing a bit of a distraction as a remedy, right? As some way to kind of deal with your mind, but knowing that, okay, this is something that's happening in my mind that's over too much for me to directly kind of deal with just with my own thoughts and reflection. So I have to do some physical action to distract myself. At least, you're building up the overall conditions to be able to address it more directly or more profoundly in the future, because you're not just creating more delusion. You're at least consciously saying, okay, I need to find a way to do a less harmful action than what my desire or what my anger wants me to do. But at least, it's going to at least it'll calm me down. I'll do something that still maybe is not, being a perfect saint and sitting there and just enduring and not, still do something to ease my, to ease the whatever, the desire, the anger. But you're aware. So you're just creating more awareness instead of more delusion. I think that's how I would understand it. It's a tough one. I'll think about that more though. It's a good question. I think I have to think about that more. You know, a lot of the practice, right, that you learn when you're really dedicating yourself to a Buddhist lifestyle and really trying to change your mind comes from observing other people. So it's kind of hard to, what to say, verbalize sometimes, or even to actually actually see what's happening. Like I'm just saying, like living in a monastery or even near a great teacher, if you're not in a monastery, but you still can go and receive teachings in person. You just observe the people and you sort of see the way they deal with things. Okay, thank you, Hans. And you see the way they deal with things. And so that itself kind of just, what to say, it rubs off on you, or, you know, you sort of pick up by osmosis different ways of dealing with things. So I would say there is a really extremely great value to being around an accomplished, or at least more highly accomplished than yourself person. You know, a spiritual practitioner that has more experience than yourself can be, being around a person like that, even occasionally, can be very beneficial. You know, because you learn things that, like, it's not like they're not in the text, but you can't always see it in the text, but you see it in the person, you know. Okay, anything else? Any question, comment? Okay, all right then. Thank you. It's so good to see all of you. I didn't even notice Sanjana came on. Oh, you must have missed the. Did you come late because you thought
Yes,
it was...
sorry, I didn't realize the
Oh,
Indian timing had changed. Yeah,
yeah, I'm sorry. Oh, yeah. I
that's
tried
okay.
to
That's okay.
send out announcements by various avenues, but I guess you didn't catch it. Okay.
No problem. No problem.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. See you all again.
See you next time.
Okay.